Hello, friends. I'm Steve, and welcome to Page Chewing Comics and Manga. I'm here today with Wes from the YouTube channel Thinking Critical. Wes, thank you for spending some time with me.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I love talking comic books. It ought to be a little bit of fun here.
Yeah, hopefully it's a little bit of fun. It is weird talking to you and seeing you, and having a conversation after watching it on YouTube so long. So I'm sure you get that a lot.
Well, I do appreciate you enjoying the channel, and there's a lot to talk about these days.
Oh yeah, there's always something to talk about. Have some questions for you. But just in case anyone's not familiar with you or what you do, can you tell us about your channel?
Yeah, I've had a YouTube channel called Thinking Critical for going almost 6 years now. Mostly it's focused on comic book content, but we do delve into the wider pop culture kind of stuff. But trying to mostly focus it. If it's going to be a movie thing, it should be kind of about comic books and kind of celebrating the medium, which I think is the greatest storytelling medium in the entire world, and pointing out some of the issues, and obviously trying to help people discover the best comic books that are out there, and understanding why things are working and aren't working. And it's been an interesting journey because I retired from the Air Force. Is kind of why I started the channel when I moved here to the Philippines, and I was an intelligence analyst, and I needed something to keep my brain churning. And it turned out the comic book industry was what was working for me.
Nice. Yeah, lots to get to with you. But how did you get into comics? What was it that sparked that interest in you?
Well, I've always it's kind of weird in the military. Everybody's kind of like macho. Everyone's go to the gym or everything, but there's also like a ton of comic book readers. Like you wouldn't really imagine it. So I was always being introduced to comic books, and specifically, I had one friend when I was stationed in England. His name is Robert. He goes by Shazam because he's an enormous DC Comics fan. And he was always bringing in these graphic novels like Red Sun. He's like, you got to see this. You got to see Dark Knight Returns. So I was kind of introduced to it through that way. Obviously, I'd had some comic books when I was a kid, but I lived in a really, really small farming town in Missouri. And they didn't really sell them in my town, but I ended up in the hospital. I got some comic books there, but it wasn't really until I was an adult that I kind of understood the medium and discovered it. Obviously, talk of like the MCU and stuff piqued a lot of my interest when I was first kicking off. I kind of knew who the characters were. I was going in and reading up on a lot of them. I was like, wow, that sounds really good. What's this Infinity Gauntlet thing? And it turns out I'm more of a DC fan, but all that stuff kind of came together, and people just having conversations about comic books, and I ended up kind of finding out what it was all about. And obviously I'd seen like Batman 89 and Superman 2 when I was a kid and stuff.
What is it about DC that you kind of gravitated more towards that side?
Well, I think the thing about DC is the heroes themselves are more aspirational. And I've always appreciated that in a hero, where they're not infallible or anything, but what they represent is a higher standard of living, like a moral code that I myself likely will never be able to achieve, but it kind of gives me something to look at. And you do get that in Marvel to a degree, with the Captain America and stuff like that. But their heroes typically are much more flawed, or have personal demons kind of in there as well. Not, you kind of get that with Batman and stuff. But I've always liked the DC universe. Specifically, I'm a huge Green Lantern fan, and you kind of get that in Marvel a little bit with like the Nova Corps, and even maybe a little bit of that cosmic stuff with Guardians of the Galaxy. But I've always been like a sci-fi kind of guy, and I think you get some really good science fiction type of vibes from DC as well. So it's always just kind of been my go-to.
Do you have a favorite Green Lantern run?
Well, there's so many great ones, right? The Jeff Johns Green Lantern stuff is so amazing because it's so additive what he does there. Obviously, I have a couple of issues because he kind of sidelines Kyle Rayner, and he brings back Hal Jordan more to the forefront after him becoming Parallax and all that kind of stuff. And it felt like the character had a great ending, but the Green Lantern Rebirth is so amazing. And then once you get in there and you get to the Sinestro Cool War, and it kind of all crescendos with Darkest Night, and you're going, oh my goodness, this is like absolutely mind blowing. It's comic books at its best, where you get into it, and everything just keeps building and building in these layers and layers, and you're getting all these payoffs. Then finally you get Darkest Night, which I think is, or I'm sorry, Blackest Night, which I think is the best or the last great comic book event we've had. Like, absolutely phenomenal. But I do have a special place for Robert Venditti Green Lantern run, Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps, just because he's my favorite writer. And that's an amazing run as well. But a lot of the modern Green Lantern stuff has been phenomenal.
I think what made I remember Blackest Night at the time was just like this big, huge event. There was a lot of excitement around it because of the Johns run and because of what led up to it. It seems like there was some build up to it. It wasn't just, here's an event, enjoy for the next 3 months and we'll go back to business after.
Oh, yeah. And it was so, it changed the DC universe after it. Like, things that weren't tied to Green Lantern were affected permanently because of what he did there. And it was just so masterfully done. You got Ivan Rice, on the art on that one. The story is just amazing. And then, he'd introduced the concept of the new Lantern Corps. We'd only had green and yellow to that point, really. And he introduces, the blue lanterns, the red lanterns, the orange lanterns, and, the Star Sapphires and all this thing. And you got that just amazing payoff. And I wonder if when he introduced it, that's what Jeff Johns was thinking about as the payoff of the concept. When you see all the heroes in the DC universe and even the villains being anointed their lantern rings and which corps they belong to. And I just remember, like, page after page, like, oh, that's perfect. Or, why is it Superman a blue lantern? Or, you could look at it as just, what a payoff. You just don't get that anymore.
No, you don't. And I wonder, why do you think we don't have an event like that anymore? What do you think the reason would be?
Well, I think the reason we don't get events like that anymore is I don't think there's a lot of editorial continuity to actually pull something like that off. That is large scale. You have to plan it out, for at least 2 years just to get to the point and do the event. But you also have to not just have the, your Green Lantern editors, which are probably your Justice League editors at the time, on board, but you need your Superman editor on board. You need your Batman editors on board and realize the ramifications of this event are going to be so big that you need to be able to spin something exciting off of that. And at the time, you would get an annual DC event. I think you would get like a summer and you would get like a spring event. Or I'm sorry, a winter and a summer event. But, to a year isn't that hard to pull off. In a given year, DC will do upwards of 3, 4, maybe 5 events sometimes if you consider some of their smaller scale like series events themselves. And then, over at Marvel, it's even a bigger cluster to where the event only exists to lead into the next event. Yeah. The ramification isn't a changing of the universe and a status quo change where you're discovering, how the world operates now, that all these things have happened. The ramification is literally the next event. Like when you go and read, I think Donny Cates is a really talented writer. And his Venom run, especially when Stegman's on there, is absolutely brilliant. Although when Stegman leaves it temporarily and they bring in Ivan Coelho, I think was the other artist. He was really good too. And you're leading up and then you get to, I believe it's Absolute Carnage. And it felt pretty exciting. It felt pretty good. And it's executed as best as it can. But once you get to the end of it, you realize Noel hasn't even arrived yet. This wasn't the event. This was a story arc in Venom that they had to make bigger to justify having an event at Marvel Comics so they could do a Spider-Man, Absolute Carnage. They could do a Daredevil Absolute Carnage, tie into all these things. And as good as it is, and it is good because Stegman's on the art on that one as well, it just felt so disappointing realizing that wasn't the main event. You hadn't even gotten there, and you had to wait another 9 months before King in Black kicks off, which is another good event because, Cates is a good writer. Mm-hmm. But I just remember being so disappointed. And that was one of the good modern events.
Yeah. It's kind of sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
I wonder, I'm not sure if you've taken a look at the sales numbers, but do the numbers go up when they have these events, like sales numbers? Do they get a spike in interest? Is that maybe a way for people who aren't keeping up to jump on?
There would be an enormous spike, especially if it was an event that had garnered interest. And I imagine the sales around like a Blackest Night, and there were a lot of tie-ins to it. If you don't remember, that thing was absolutely huge. certainly the mainline series and Green Lantern and some of the bigger titles associated with it, I imagine, generated enormous spikes in sales. And you are still getting that to a degree, but the value add of an event, especially at Marvel or DC these days, isn't there because the events don't feel special. They don't feel like they're ever really built to. And at this point, you're almost trained that when you get to the end of it, it doesn't really mean anything. They recently had Axe Judgment Day at Marvel Comics, which is a crossover of the Avengers and X-Men. Already sells itself, right? You know, you two biggest teams at Marvel Comics, the two of the biggest teams in comic book history, and they threw the Eternals on there. And you end up later finding out that it really was an Eternal storyline that they ended up blowing up into an event, and it kind of makes sense. But once you get to the end of it, you know, everyone's being judged and people are being put to death because they're not worthy because this cosmic entity is coming back, and I guess they reanimate the big cosmic thing that the Avengers were living inside at the time. And at the end, the villain loses and he returns everything to the exact same way that it was before, and everyone that died didn't die. So there was no stakes and no consequences to the thing itself. It just basically, it erased itself at the conclusion because it wasn't important. Hmm. And that's when you kind of feel duped.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of a bummer, isn't it? Yeah. You know, when you mentioned you started reading comics as an adult, has your approach to reading changed now that you review comics for the channel and now you have to kind of convey your thoughts? How has that approach changed for you?
Well, when I first started the channel, and I was actually more of a review channel than like a news or opinion channel at the time, I try to read as much as possible because we were at the tail end of DC Rebirth, and there's some really cool things going on at DC, and there's actually some pretty decent stuff going on at Marvel at the time. And it wasn't really all that difficult, but reading that many comic books, you know, it's actually a lot of work. And then I think reviews are harder to do than just talking about opinions and stuff. To fully articulate why something worked or why it didn't work, you know, because it's easy to say, well, that sucked. Well, why did it suck? What made it not work? Was it the characterization? Was it the plot? Was it the pacing? You know, when you kind of have to articulate all those things and point them out, it definitely makes you read comic books different, to where you're thinking about not only was this enjoyable or was that scene action-packed and a lot of fun to see, because a lot of the fun in a comic book is the visual spectacle that you're enjoying because there are no strings on the creators. But once you start like doing a lot of reviews, you have to think, did this work? Was the execution and what they're trying to get to, did it even perform? Or within this comic book, did it even tell a story? Mm-hmm. Or was this just a side seed that never really fully fleshed out, and was it worth, you know, $4 or $5? You know, it's $5 now. It would have been $4 at the time. I've had to read and review much less comic books lately because once you get into you get out of DC Rebirth, you get in this weird period where Tom King is the number one writer along with Scott Snyder. Yeah. And then Bendis shows up and he brings all his friends in, and the quality kind of dips. There's a few little oases there. Then you get to Future State, and it really just kind of falls apart whole cloth. And they're recovering a little bit right now. And then Marvel just kind of cratered. Like, they had some really good stuff, but all their writers kind of left for Substack. You know, Nick Spencer was doing a really good Spider-Man run, which never really fully got paid off because he went to Substack. Jonathan Hickman had come in with House of X and Powers of 10. Well, if you consider that one an event, I would say that one's the last great event that Marvel or DC did because the ramifications are so amazing and the writing is so good. But, you know, he ends up leaving X-Men prematurely, never finishes his story, goes over to Substack, you know, dips his toe in every now and again. Scott Snyder leaves DC. James Tynion, the Batman writer, leaves DC. There's, like, no talent left. So I have to read less comic books because there's so much bad out there. And it turns out there's only so much I could take. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially when you're looking with that critical eye and you just see so much that's not working with the execution of it. And you can see so many of the tricks that they're trying to do to make it feel like, you know, it's a good story. And, you know, kind of throws you off. So I'm reading less comic books now than I did 3 or 4 years ago. But but I am enjoying it more because I'm focusing more on like the really good stuff, like Batman, Superman, World's Finest. There's recently a really good Flash run. I'm a big Green Lantern fan. We're only 2 issues into the Jeremy Adams run, but that looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. Superman's good right now. Over at Marvel, there's really only Moon Knight.
Yeah,
Seems weird, doesn't it?
it is weird. Yeah. How do you decide what to read? How do you when you see the like a you go through to your list? What do you look for? What stands out to you? How do you make that decision?
My driving factor when I'm picking out comic books that I want to read for me, not for potential reviews or videos and stuff on the channel, I almost always follow the creators now. I don't follow the characters, which is completely opposite what I was doing 4 years ago. To where it's like, well, I think X-Men is absolutely awesome. I'll read almost everything X-Men. But I've learned that that's just a house of pain that I don't want to deal with. But, if Jeremy Adams, who's a newer writer who did that Flash run I was just speaking of, if they put him on a book, because I'm comfortable with what he does with the characters and his style of writing and the fact that he takes authentic versions of the characters and tries to re-explore them. I was on Green Lantern and I was very happy about that. So I will follow him there. Robert Venditti, if he does something at DC, for the most part, I'm going to read. Jeff Johns, I'm going to give it a try. There's a lot of good indie guys, too. I think Matt Kinn is absolutely brilliant. He's got his own imprint over at Dark Horse right now. And he's a really, really good writer. But, and I think that's one of the reasons that sales are down so bad at DC and Marvel is because people aren't invested in the characters and universe anymore. They're invested in the creators because it's so... there's not like a baseline of this is the minimum of what you can expect, which is a competent comic book.
Yeah.
You don't know what to expect anymore.
No.
So do you really want to play the lethal lottery, or you just want to follow your favorite writer around as he explores new characters? And it's turned out, I think for a lot of people, it's probably just find the creator that you like and you follow them, which has definitely been to the detriment of Marvel and DC. As I mentioned, they lost almost all their A-list talent in the space of about 3 months.
Wow. Yes. Do you see? Do you anticipate that going on longer, or do you think that things will change where there's like a certain standard that they have for certain groups or certain books that they have a certain level or a certain kind of for us readers to have an expectation of quality?
That's a really interesting question because I've looked into these things and Mark Miller, obviously he wrote Civil War, Red Sun, done a lot of great stuff. He did a lot of amazing stuff. He's doing his Netflix stuff now with his Miller World. He's got Big Game came out last week. He's pointed out correctly that the industry is cyclical. That you have these there's like a 20-year major cycle as things go boom and bust. And then there's mini cycles within that as the popularity rises and falls. And basically, like, you've probably noticed this if you're reading comic books, we're in an era of no creativity whatsoever anymore. Everybody's trying to be Alan Moore, and they're trying to be Frank Miller. And those concepts are absolutely amazing. Those are two of the best writers in the history of comic books, if not the best writers in the history of the comic. I got a bug. Writers in the history of the comic book industry. And it's not like the worst idea to ape these guys, but their original ideas that were amazing, in some cases, are 40 years old now. They're 30 years old, and we've been working on the same type of trope as far as storytelling within comic books, and there's only so much juice you can squeeze out of that.
Yeah.
So I think we're kind of in this holding pattern as comic book fans, waiting for this next generation of talent to arrive, if they ever do, because now, in the meantime, the page rates have declined steadily. The A-list creators, for the most part, have left, and we're not just talking about the writers, which a lot of them have gone. Mark Miller, he does comic books on the side. His job is to be a Netflix, executive at this point, and develop content for Netflix. A lot of the artists have done the same thing. You think about Todd McFarlane, one of the most instrumental, influential artists of all times. Yeah, he still has his Spawn universe, and he just announced he's expanding it. But he doesn't make his money on Spawn. He makes his money on McFarlane Toys. He owns his own toy company. And that allows him to go and dabble in the things that he loves on the side. And I think a lot of the really talented people in comic books have realized that this probably isn't the end game or the finish line for what they want to do, unless you want to end up jaded like an Alan Moore, who basically,
Yeah.
he hates the industry because he got screwed over so many times. And I think a lot of people, they might dabble in comic books, but I think they're kind of bypassing it to get into, the Hollywood. There's a lot of need for screenwriters right now. Obviously not now because of the strike, but in the meantime, they're looking for creative ideas. And we've certainly seen comic book creators go to Hollywood and be successful. Brian K. Vaughan was on Lost. Frank Miller has written plenty of screenplays, and we've seen plenty of his independent material get converted out to the big screen and be very successful. And I think those people aren't cutting their teeth in comics anymore. I think they're just bypassing it altogether because of the horror stories. And the same thing goes with art. I've talked to a lot of really good artists. One that was really interesting is Aaron Lopresti. I believe he started out at Malibu Comics, and then he worked up his way and eventually ended up being a mainstay at DC Comics for a long time until Dan Didio was let go. And apparently they lost his number and forgot to hire one of the better artists that they had ever again. He was talking about, I had a conversation with him. He's like, the interesting thing is, he said the level of illustration today in comic books is as good, if not better, than it's ever been, because the amount of jobs available for traditional illustrators just aren't there. Back in the day, you would have been in advertising, and you would have been illustrating advertisements for Camel Smokes or something like that, or a restaurant. And he goes, but that stuff's all computer generated anymore. And if you're a traditional artist, those opportunities aren't there. So a lot of those people that would have had other opportunities are in comic books, but they're not visual storytellers. So you get really good, competent illustrations, but you don't get that comic book visual storytelling that captures the eye and takes you through the thing, and and really understands that each panel tells a section of the story rather than provides a visual representation of what the narration or the dialogue is telling you. The visual part is a separate entity, and it should be telling really 80% of the story as far as the actions and the reactions, and you see the faces and all that stuff, and that's kind of all vanishing at this point for the most part, because a lot of the great visual storytellers, where are they going? Video games. There's more money there.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think about that. How much do you think AI will change the comic book industry?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, that could it could change everything. So if you're DC Comics and you're struggling as a publisher, and you're not making a whole lot of money, and the one way that you can make money is with variant covers, eventually do you just take the signature off and do you do AI generated covers that don't cost you any money? You have an AI artist, right?
Yeah.
Somebody that just does prompts. Oh, you want Harley Quinn in a sexy pose with an enormous hammer with Joker's face in the background? I can create that for you in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't need to go pay $3,000 for that illustration that we're going to throw on a 1 in 250 variant cover that's going to draw a lot of interest because it's art germ or whatever. So I imagine right now I don't think it'll have a lot of impact, although I do know in a couple instances where there has been AI generated or at least AI altered art that has made it into DC specifically. From what I'm told, there was at least one instance. I think for now, DC and Marvel will hold the line because that's kind of the prevailing public thought. But I think over time, once they realize the savings, and you can only raise the cover price so many times.
Yeah.
I can't see them doing anything else but going El Cheapo and doing that. And if they try to do that with interiors, it'll be a much bigger fiasco for them. Because if you think a competent illustrator can't do visual storytelling, AI is not going to be able to do that.
No. And you had a video on this about cutting, speaking of cutting costs, we did a video about the digital and whether or not it's the future, and you just can't beat that experience of holding a book. And I wonder, I agree with you, by the way. I wonder if we're in the minority because we see digital music taking off and not a lot of people are buying physical anymore, even movies.
I'm not in the minority. I think digital is the future. It's already
okay.
proven out. Doc, who's a regular contributor on my channel, likes to argue with me about this, and I understand.
Yeah.
I love holding a comic book in my hand. I like the smell of the pages, especially when you get some good paper and it's a visceral experience as you're going through it. And there's a lot of reasons to love that. But I can tell you, as somebody here in the Philippines, there's one city that has comic book shops in this entire country, and I don't live in it. If I want those comic books, I gotta order them through the mail. I have to pay the up price because they're all 20% more just for being overseas, because there's no distribution from DC Comics outside of North America, Canada, and probably the UK. And then on top of that, I got to pay a mailing charge on it. And I'm a YouTube channel that does current content for comic books. Obviously it could take 3 days if I'm lucky to get here. So I might be able to get it on a Friday or Saturday, but much more likely I'm going to get it on a Monday or something like that. And at that point, the content of the comic books themselves, if I wanted to make a video or any type of content about it or have anything original to say, is already going to be outdated.
Yeah.
So I have to do everything digital. And, when you look at what manga has done, it's absolutely genius. When you look at what DC and Marvel have done, and we'll talk a little bit about the juxtaposition of the way that they attack the market and try to make things work. DC and Marvel have wholly relied on an audience that they already had, that they continue to drive away because they don't appreciate a lot of the content that's actually in the comic books themselves, and they've had to sell them the same comic book over and over and over again. And when I say the same comic book, I don't mean the same character or the same series. I mean the same issue. They need you to buy it multiple times just to keep them afloat. And that's why we've got all these gimmick variant cover schemes and everything going on, because I can't afford to just sell you Batman once. I need you to buy it 4 times in a lot of cases. So I'll throw these variant covers. We'll do the ratio variants, and it'll cost you more on the first order, and it'll entice the comic book shops to over-order on things that they know that they can't really sell, because they're only courting the collectors and speculators at this point. They're not really courting the readers at all. Most of the people that were happy to read but don't really have that investment when it comes into full collections, or they don't see spec value, like it doesn't entice them to continue to buy the product. For the most part, they've kind of walked away and they found alternatives to that. When you see what like Shueisha specifically has done, with their Shonen Jump and all that kind of stuff, they never cared at all for anything for collectors or speculators. Every decision that they've ever made, and they've explained this, it's all out there for the public to go and consume. Like, they've given away all the secrets, and what they thought was the most important thing to do to grow their business was, we need the most readers that we can find, people that invest in our characters and invest in our stories and like them so much they continue to come back. And obviously the best example of that is the Shonen Jump app itself. I believe the price just went up from $2 to $3. And for that $3 subscription, which is all digital, obviously, it's on your mobile device. A lot of times I like to read it on the tablet, obviously, because the pages are bigger. You get full access to the entire library. And when you get to your Shonen Jump and you say, hey, I like that series, and you hit the little button on it, and maybe you finished off whatever chapter say on, maybe it's a newer one. Every time there's a new chapter loaded, it notifies you that that's where it is. And it'll also tell you where you can get physical copies of that. So now the people, you have a really cheap distribution method, i.e. kind of like a spinner rack back in the day in your local pharmacy, but it's at the palm of your hand, and it's in everybody's hand. And they wonder why manga is absolutely destroying it, because their digital strategy, and they never cared about collectors. They never wanted to sell the same comic book to the same people over and over and over again. They just wanted to get it out there, mass distribution, easy access, and affordable. And that's what the Shonen Jump app is. It's absolutely amazing. For $3, their entire catalog. For $3, you can just read One Piece for the rest of your life. There's over 1,000 chapters in that damn thing. It would take you, it'd take you a couple years just to get through that, and that's maybe the best, the most well-known manga series of all time. And there's a lot of them that have gone on like that. And there's so much diversity, I guess if that's the word you want to use, where you can get superhero manga, you can get volleyball manga, you can get food truck manga, you can get slice of life manga, you can get LGBTQ coming of age manga, you can get fantasy manga, sci-fi manga. It's all there, and it's all in one thing for $3. If you go get the DC Comics Unlimited app for, I think it's $12 a month. I can't remember the exact price because I'm overseas. But it's over $10. You don't get the full catalog, and you don't get access to all their comic books the day and date of release like you do on a Shonen Jump for $3. It's a limited catalog, and you don't even get the stuff for another 60 days, I believe now. It might be down to 30.
Oh, wow.
I know they were going to change it. And it's the same thing with their Marvel stuff. The only thing new there is you get their like Marvel digital Infinity comics that nobody would ever pay for to begin with. And there's no value add. And they've never, like, where manga has thrived is because they said we need to get this out to the masses. And where DC and Marvel have failed is they've decided the masses aren't important as long as we can keep our hardcore base. Now, they've been trying to expand their audience, but it turns out the people that are looking for slice of life and LGBTQ coming-of-age stories and gender theory comic books don't really want to see it in superhero form. There's an entire genre for that. They can go to Barnes & Noble or Amazon or Walmart, and they have their graphic novels, and they sell well because they specifically target the audience that they need to target. And DC aren't targeting anybody at this point. They're just doing it because they've always done it.
Mm-hmm. I think you had a video recently about that too, about it being in the wrong genre, about these stories. They don't belong in they don't fit in a superhero kind of genre existing, or even new characters. What do you think the hesitation is there for them to not create a new series that focuses on fantasy or horror or whatever? What is that? What do you think? Where do you think that's preventing them from doing that, from creating a new series?
Well, nothing's preventing them. In fact, DC did that for a long time with their Vertigo series. Yeah. Most of that stuff wasn't superheroes. A lot of it was horror. A lot of it was sci-fi, fantasy. A lot of it was, LGBTQ inclusive stories with characters that you wouldn't normally see in the mainline DC universe. Now, that is off-brand, and it's certainly a risk when you take that, but they destroyed, Vertigo at this point, and I think they're conflating the interest in superheroes with the interest in these other things. And you could do fun stuff. You do Brave and the Bold, where next thing you know, Batman is in a medieval setting. I mean, that stuff's fun, and you can do those one-offs. But, if they wanted to wholly do a universe like that, you just got to revitalize Vertigo, and then you have to pay the creators. The reason they killed Vertigo, and this is why Image is as big as it is because Neil Gaiman obviously created the Sandman universe and expanded whatever, and they realized, holy crap, we didn't take all his rights away as a creator, even though that was his idea. He wasn't working on anything that we created wholly. Those were his ideas that he wanted to create, and he's making residuals, and he's able to dictate the terms of what the future of Sandman is, whether it be in comic books or obviously streaming and Netflix and stuff like this. And they just changed the contracts and said, anything you create for Vertigo, even though it's not our idea, these are your own creator-owned ideas, well, we're going to own all the rights to them, like it's a Superman story or it's a Batman story, which made no sense. So everyone was like, well, I don't think I want this god-awful contract or agreement with DC Comics. I'll just go over to do it with Image and take my chances. And sometimes you get enormous successes like The Walking Dead and Saga, and a lot of times you don't. But, a lot of those books would have been Vertigo books back in the day, but they just basically just destroyed the imprint because they couldn't stand the fact that creators were making money off their own ideas.
How much does Alan Moore regret those decisions? He's
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because they pigeonholed themselves.
Yeah.
To where they are only one genre. You think about DC and Marvel, you only think about superheroes today.
Yeah.
Whereas in the 90s, you didn't think that. DC had some of the most cutting edge ideas ever.
Oh yeah, yeah. I miss Vertigo. Really good stuff. Really great stuff. If you were given the keys to Marvel or DC, what would you change if they gave you the keys and said, "Here, what changes would you make?" Like day one.
Well, my foundational change, the first thing that the thing that's destroying both companies at the heart of it, and I have a video coming out somewhat soon on this one, it's the editorial staffs. There really aren't any writing professionals in there. A lot of those people came in as interns. They've never been successful writers. They've never edited successful books, and in a lot of cases, and you can see it when you read the stories, they don't even know who the characters are. They don't know the histories. So you get these weird hodgepodge versions of the characters that make no sense, and the consumer can see that this isn't right. That's not Alan Scott, or that doesn't feel like something that Batman would do, and it doesn't feel authentic, and it doesn't feel real. Well, the reason I buy into the serialized idea of what DC and Marvel are doing with their publishing is that the same character never dies. They just go on forever, and and they adjust to the times, obviously, because the culture around the universe is basically, for the most part, kind of grounded in what our universes are. So yeah, the background characters' outfits and stuff change. Nobody's wearing bell bottoms and sideburns anymore because it's not the '70s. But at the heart, the characters are the same. And the stories are impactful, and it's relevant to what you read 30 years ago. And that's not the case anymore, because the characters in a lot of cases are unrecognizable, especially with a character like Batman. DC was leading on that character so much. I believe, sometimes over half of all their comic books released in a month were starring Batman or a Batman-related character. That is absolutely insane. And you can't have good quality control when you can't keep your reins on a character if you're writing that many Batman stories, especially when you have an editorial staff that just aren't very competent. They aren't, in a lot of cases, I don't think that they ever really went to school for this. I don't think they know the three-act story structure in a lot of cases. So I think you have to start, at the baseline with the editorial staffs and go out there, and you have to have more compensation. You can't pay somebody $30,000 annually in New York City, even if they are an assistant editor, which isn't the highest position in the world, and expect them to do a good job. Nobody wants that job because you can't even afford an apartment, let alone eat.
Yeah. Yeah, no way. Yeah, especially New York.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane. How much has something like the Rippaverse? Has that changed? Has that been a big change for, or like how Marvel and DC? How has it changed their approach, or do you think that's going to make a big impact on the future?
Certainly not. I don't. Maybe in the future it will, but it's almost an anomaly, right?
Right.
The guy created his own crowdfunding space and did $4 million in sales on the first issue,
crazy.
and I think he was over $2 million on the second issue. And there's real talent on those books as well. Obviously Eric July knows what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. I did a recent video talking about the annual sales at graphic novels in the bookstores.
Right.
And we're talking, these are like finite, really good sales numbers. And at cover cost, when you look at the DC comics that were in the top 750 graphic novels sold in North America, and we're only talking about Western graphic novels. We're not counting manga at that point. Of the top 750, at cover price, DC had done $9 million in sales in that group of 750. Now, obviously, there's going to be stuff under that. Omnibuses and stuff aren't going to reach that threshold because they're very expensive. And you're going to make a lot more money just on the lower sales and whatnot, just because they are so expensive. But he did $4 million on a 40-page comic book, a little plus-size comic book, and I believe, I think it might have been 60 pages. I might have that wrong, and I believe the next one's even bigger. And he did an additional $2 million, but he's competing sales-wise with DC and Marvel on a national scale. That's embarrassing. Not because Eric July is a bad guy, and it's not because Eric July is a bad businessman. He's got a very successful YouTube channel. He's a musician. He's a storyteller. Obviously, he's done a lot of stuff. He's very, very successful, and I'm not surprised that he was very successful. I'm a little surprised that he outperformed Keanu Reeves in the comic book crowdfunding landscape, but he did. The change that I could see, and you are seeing some of the smaller publishers do this, is utilizing crowdfunding as a resource to generate revenue before they make the comic book. Obviously, we did see it with the Keanu Reeves Berserker series, co-written by Matt Kent, who I talked about earlier, with Ron Garney on art. Absolutely phenomenal looking book. I believe it's also going to be a Netflix a movie or show or something like that. Oh, okay. But that had Keanu Reeves attached to it, and they had some bunch of special collections that they had sold, basically like a year and a half in advance, because it was going to be the entire first 12 issues. I believe in 3 graphic novels is what they were doing. But you're starting to see Valiant has done that, and you're seeing Dynamite is getting into the crowdfunding space. I wouldn't be surprised if in time DC goes, well, maybe we can't afford to pay Scott Snyder up front on a new Batman series. But to get around that, maybe we do a little crowdfunding with some specialties on there even before it even starts, and maybe we can generate that extra, $100,000 or whatever you need to actually pay the guy, because it feels like the budget's so low, to actually bring somebody like that in. They might need to end up utilizing the crowdfunding space, and maybe they will try to do something like Eric July has done, where he created his own website. He doesn't have to pay Kickstarter. He doesn't pay Indiegogo their little fees for processing and all that. He does it all in-house. Obviously, Hasbro, I believe, has done something like that with Hasbro. Is it Pulse? I think where they have...
I believe so, yeah.
You can get their specialized crowd-funded, internal crowdfunding type stuff. And I would not be surprised if you see DC and Marvel end up having to go down that road if they want to get some bigger name talent or to get some more enthusiasm on things that they think are special.
Oh, wow. Makes sense, I guess. I mean, seeing the feedback or the success that Eric's having with his campaign is pretty amazing.
Absolutely, that was absolutely awesome.
You release a lot of content, and all those videos they take time. They take time to script and to record and to edit and all that stuff. How much time do you spend in your channel? Like, let's say per week, on average.
Oh man, it's changed over time. So when I first started, I was trying to get out 4 videos a week, and all my videos were scripted. And when I say scripted, like everything was scripted. And those took a long time. And then I started doing more stuff where I was talking to people, and I wasn't editing my videos. And that was really easy.
Yeah.
So eventually I ended up upping my production to 3 videos a day, which now that I look back on it was absolutely insane. And I was working a lot. And I do a 2-hour live stream on Saturdays. And now I'm down to, most days I'll do 2 videos, but a lot of times it'll be one. It all depends on what's going out there. I don't want to end up producing bad content, but I do edit all my videos now. And then even before I make a video, if I can't come up with a title or an angle to come with the video that I think is intriguing or worth clicking on, I won't even make the video. I'll start working on something, and I'll be like, there's just no way to make this exciting with a thumbnail and a title. Like, I think it's relevant information, but if no one's ever going to watch it, what's the point? Kind of, as I've grown as a YouTuber. So it's weird, because I used to be in the military, and obviously I would work well over 40 hours a week, but, oh man, it's probably like 45. Something like that. I don't really take days off.
Yeah.
I kind of just work 7 days a week.
It seems like you have a lot of content, and it takes time. All that does take a lot of time.
Yeah, but this is the thing. It's not hard. Well, sometimes it's hard, because I do get frustrated. You can only put up with so much bad things coming out that are pissing you off. But for the most part, I like this. Like, I didn't enjoy the intelligence work. I mean, I enjoyed the intelligence work, but I didn't really enjoy, especially there at the end, being in the Air Force anymore. I was like, I think I've had enough of this. And I haven't really felt that way about YouTube. In fact, I love it. I quite enjoy it. I can be really creative. I get to stay on top of things. I built up this really nice community of really awesome people. Not only that come on the channel and we talk about this stuff, and I met so many awesome people doing that. And I got to interview Matt Kent, who I love. Robert Medidi's my writer, or my favorite writer. I got to interview him. I got to interview Ron Garney. I got to interview Mark Miller. I've had all these really cool things happen to me. And I probably don't deserve any of it, but I'll definitely take it. But then I have all the viewers are just awesome. Yeah. And they built this really great community around me. And sure, you have a few people that want to come in and tell you you're a jerk off or whatever, but that's life, man. Yeah. You got to put it out of your mind and enjoy the ride. So
just comes with the territory for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, have lots of weird comments. And speaking of speaking with people in the industry, have you ever had a negative review and then run into the creator later and had this awkward kind of? Have you gotten any feedback from whether it's a good or bad review that you've had?
Well, I've certainly gotten a lot of feedback to reviews. A lot of they're more affable when they're positive reviews.
Yeah, yeah,
Not surprisingly,
yeah.
but I have had a negative, well, maybe not even negative, but it wasn't overwhelming praise for a comic book, and I've certainly had some creators reach out to me over the past 6 years. Like I know Scott Snyder did at one point. And he's kind of known for that. He'll reach out to people that do reviews, not only on YouTube but written reviews and stuff like that, to get some feedback and stuff like that. Jeremy Adams is a newer writer that will do that as well. Who is it? My goodness, how am I forgetting his name? I'm a big fan. The guy that did Batman: The White Knight, Sean Gordon Murphy.
Yeah.
I had a not so nice review of his second volume of that because I wasn't a big fan. He reached out to me. And he was really friendly about it. Hey, I'm sorry it wasn't your tea. I know we're going in a direction that not everyone's going to love, but I do appreciate you covering it and being honest with your assessment. So, you got to like people like that. He can take it.
Yeah, yeah. There's some people who can't. Some people can't.
Mark Waid cannot.
No.
I'm saying, if you ever go to Comic Book Roundup, he's writing Batman and Superman World's Finest. Best series in comic books, no doubt right now. And you'll see there'll be a review that's 9.5 out of 10. We're talking like the slimmest of margin not being a perfect comic book. And you'll read the review, and then if there's a comment section, you'll have Mark Waid in there, like telling them why they were wrong, and it was perfect. I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh, that's Mark Waid.
So we know that you spend a lot of time reading comics and creating content. What other hobbies do you have when you're not doing that?
I am a stay-at-home dad. I think that's why I'm so happy and content with what I'm doing. Yeah, I stay up at night. I have to do all my work because my boys are 8, 4, and 2.
Oh, wow.
And they destroy everything, and they don't know how to be quiet. So yeah. I have to do all my work while they're sleeping. And I sleep at the very beginning of the day, and then I wake up a little bit after lunch and do all my dad stuff, and we get to hang out and play. And I cook all the meals and stuff in the house. That's another one of my passions. Is my mom was a cook my entire life growing up, and at one point she actually had a little restaurant in the town I grew up in, and I was like a short order cook for her, and I learned a lot of like tricks there. So yeah, playing with the boys and staying home with the kids is awesome. That's the best thing about being retired and doing this YouTube thing. But yeah, I really like the cooking, man. That's a lot of the stress relief.
What's their favorite dish that you make for them? What's their go-to if they could pick anything? So
my 4-year-old will not eat anything right now. He's on crackers and candy at the moment. But my 8-year-old, he's into Dad's cooking, and I'm very happy about this. His favorite meal that I cook was my favorite meal growing up. It's my grandma's tuna casserole, which is absolutely brilliant. It's the best tuna casserole you'll ever have in your life, and I make way better stuff than that. But he thinks the tuna casserole is numero uno, and I wouldn't want it any other way.
Oh, nice. What can you give us a rundown of what's in it, or kind of how it's prepared?
Oh my goodness, this is like a secret recipe my grandma got out of a. So like in the '60s, you would go to your church or whatever, and you could buy like these home recipe books, and they would do it as like fundraisers for the church and stuff. And I guess she got it out of there. This is what she told me. It's got macaroni noodles, and you have to use canned tuna, but it has to be tuna in oil. And you cannot throw out the oil because, according to Grandma, that was where the flavor was. Then you need cream cheese, cream of mushroom soup, a little bit of mustard, and then the key ingredient, the magic, is from the chopped onions, which you can get like they're like dried onions, but they're kind of bigger flakes. You mix all that stuff together. You bake it with some crackers that are broken up with butter melted all onto them, and it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it sounds like it. My stomach's rumbling just hearing you talk about it. And you mentioned your time in the Air Force. What did you learn about yourself during that time? What did you take away from that?
In the Air Force, though, that was interesting. So I had a weird upbringing. It wasn't the most pleasant thing in the world, and I knew something was wrong. This doesn't feel like everyone should be having to do with this. This is all this BS that I'm doing. And then my cousin had joined the Air Force when I was like, I don't know, like 15. And I was like, I don't know, she could pass basic training, and there's no way I couldn't do it. So when I was 17, I joined the Air Force, and I took the test, and I did pretty good, and I got signed up to be like a space systems operator, which means that you could, command and control satellites, but you can also work on ground networks that monitor satellites. And I ended up doing all that kind of stuff. It was really interesting, and I was really actually introverted at the time. I don't know, it was just kind of weird. So over the course of time, I started to be more comfortable with myself and other people. I realized not everybody was trying to screw me over. And I started being a little bit more trusting, and obviously over time you start getting promoted. Next thing you know, you're having to be a supervisor. And then you realize, oh, okay, my job isn't just to do a good job. I also have to monitor this person and train them up and make sure that they're doing a good job, and all that stuff helped me out a lot. I don't think I could have the YouTube channel without ever actually being in the Air Force. And somehow I made it up to be like a master sergeant. I don't know what the hell the Air Force was thinking. But in the middle, I got bored. I didn't want to be in Colorado anymore. I was tired of it. And they were bringing all the space jobs into the state of Colorado. And I was like, I just don't like potheads that much. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with it, but I just don't want to live in an entire state of potheads. So I had to cross-trade, and I became like a electrical signals intelligence analyst, which is basically radar signals. And I've always been kind of a geek, especially math, and you need to be able to do a lot of like trigonometry and calculus and stuff for it. So I did pretty good. And then I don't know, I just started traveling the world. It was amazing. It turns out I'm really into cultures. Like that's something I absolutely did not know, that I was super duper interested in the cultures of the world and what made people different, and food cultures and language cultures and all that kind of stuff. And started discovering board cinema, and it turned out I was a world traveler. I had no idea.
Nice. It's amazing how you can travel just a few miles and how different the cultures are. Just even a few miles down the street.
Yeah, you go to Texas, you drive 10 miles, you don't even see another city. Yeah. You're just seeing the tumbleweeds, and you're in the same state. You go to Europe and you drive 10 miles, you're going to go through 5 countries with 6 or 7 different languages and 8 food cultures.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I love Europe. It was great.
Yeah, it's great. It's really good stuff. One of the questions I like to ask all my guests is, what was your first job?
My very first job was working for my mom in that restaurant. And the interesting thing about that job is I did make a little bit of casserole, but mostly she paid me in smokes. Even though I was 15 years old, I got 2 cartons of smokes a month pay for that job.
2 cartons of smokes a month, huh?
When I was 15. Wow. My mom was not very responsible.
Did you smoke them, or did you turn around and sell them? Or what?
Well, I mean, I wasn't in prison or anything. Of course I was smoking them.
Okay.
We're going to get some toilet wine with that smokes?
I don't know if you bartered them or
traded them for, we were bad kids. We weren't very well supervised.
Yeah,
it
doesn't sound like it. Other than a smoking habit, what did you learn from that first job experience?
Oh, I mean, that I like to cook. I mean, I learned it. Actually, my mom was a great cook, so it was interesting working with her. She had her own way of doing things, but man, that lady she could turn anything into something amazing. So, I don't know. I've always had that with me. I've always liked cooking. So that's definitely the thing I got out of that. Although when I worked at Hardee's, I didn't like cooking as much.
No?
No, Hardee's was kind of gross.
Yeah, that's kind of gross. And I know that you have lots to do and boys to take care of. I don't want to take too much of your time, but if someone's looking for you, where's the best place for people to find you?
Oh, you go to YouTube, and now you can search Thinking Critical, and a lot of times my channel will come up when it was smaller. It turns out that don't use like 2 words, even if they're backwards, in a key phrase that would lead you to other content. But if you type in Thinking Critical, the channel will come up. If you don't see it, you just put Thinking Critical comic books, and you'll see the logo. And like I said, I normally do, at a minimum, 1 video a day, but a lot of times 2. I'm also on social media, like I'm on Twitter and stuff, but I don't really do a whole lot there. It turns out that, social media is not very much fun anymore.
You mean X? Is it an X this week?
Is it X? Yeah, I think it's X now.
Yeah,
weird.
It's wild. Yeah, it is weird. Well, I really, really, I know you're really busy, have lots to do. I really appreciate your time, and it's been a pleasure.
Well, thanks for inviting me, man. And I'll love to come back if you ever want to talk comic books again. I really enjoyed it, and thank you for being a very wonderful host.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, thanks for your time. We'll talk to you soon.